Hello fellow gamers, and welcome to my head-to-head of Assassin's Creed Unity and technical analysis across the PS4, the Xbox One and of course the PC. I'm going to do my review in a couple of days time simply because there's so much to work through at this point. I've got that many games, I cannot possibly give this enough attention to spend to go through the game in that detail, so it'll probably up around Tuesday of next week. I'll get that done for you. But that said, I'm keen to get this head-to-head and technical analysis up on the game because I know a lot of you will be very hungry to see how this game pans out, what it plays like, and how bad are the glitches and bugs in this game, and how bad is the performance. Well, let's first off, before we get into the performance side of it, let's go through how these three versions sit against each other. First up, the Xbox One version. With this being the preferred platform of choice according to developers and everyone on the internet, this is the version that everyone should play because this is the one that will play the best. The first thing is, yes, it does run 900p and it is a locked 30 frames per second, or at least it's a capped 30 frames per second. The game performs reasonably well in certain parts, but once you get into big dense crowds, although that's not the only reason it does dip, it does have massive dips. Cutscenes are hugely affected by the frame rate. You have certain scenes where you can definitely feel the frame rate drop into low 20s for sure. Here you can see an example of what I'm talking about. This particular scene here has a lot of Fresnel work and subsurface scattering and lots of dynamic lights around and shadows, so it's heavy in abundance in GPU work, and you can see it taking a hit on the frame rate, which is probably running around 22-23 frames per second. I couldn't quote you exact frame rates because obviously it's impossible to get. You can see the detail and the vivid work in the art style, the DOF effect, which is the depth of field effect that you see that blurs out the image, and on top of that you get that superb bokeh effect, which is where light kind of goes into a circular or a hexagon shape. That basically gives that look of a camera focusing in and out like you get in films or even photography work, and it is a superb implementation that's a step above the great one that was in Watch Dogs. And Ubisoft really have moved on in the cinematics in games. These are all real time and they look absolutely stunning, and they really have gone all out with lots of post-processing effects, and the skin and the facial animation is something of beauty. It certainly is a massive leap over previous games on anything in terms of facial animation and capture animation. It is so lifelike and so realistic. You can see here as Arno talks, you can feel the emotion and see it in his face, subtle movements in his eyes, his mouth, the expressions and how he lip syncs words. You can clearly see the sadness in Elise's eyes here, and she doesn't need to say a word, and that is a stunning achievement. And this is all helped by the superb voice acting and capture animation work, and it is of a very, very high standard, and something that again Ubisoft should be commended for and people should be recognising. They have really raised the bar in quality of video game production. You can see the pores in his skin and the light reflecting from the sweat. Within its arsenal of post-processing effects, it also runs a film grain effect with in-game, but you can see it better in cutscenes, and it's subtle and well implemented here, and stands out more in darker areas. All of the detail in this game is absolutely stunning, and it doesn't end there. Everything in the game, at least clothing, fabric, sheets, bellowing in the wind, hair, tops, dresses, shirts, everything reacts realistically and flows with a cloth physics simulation running all the time. And this runs across guards, enemies, NPCs, yourself, even running in real time throughout all the cutscenes. Hair also has the same amount of work. You can see here from the hair of Elise, the detail in her hair. It is the best looking hair I have seen in a cutscene in a game. Arno's hair looks like hair with little frizzled edges. You can see the individual strands in his hair and his ponytail, and this vivid attention to detail and all the subtle things make this stand out. The way she moves her arm and the sleeves of her dress billow and move around realistically, and in fact there's points to this game where I actually think it looks like a Disney film. It has that feel, detailed, lots of keyframe animation. There is a huge amount of talent at Ubisoft here for their animation team, looking like something out of a CGI movie. They really are very impressive. So obviously it's another physically based render again. We've got a lot of baked work in this game. Allegedly, according to Ubisoft themselves, half of the game's data is baked lighting. That said, it is some of the best lighting you will ever see. The amount of detail on the cloth and the shirts, you can see as light passes through his shirt from the sunlight here at the top in Paris. You can see the light passing through the collar of his shirt and around his arms. You can see the silhouette of his body underneath the shirt. You can see the anisotropic lighting effect on his hair. As you move the camera around, it cascades down his hair realistically. In the beginning scene here, you can see the light shines through the beard, of the Templar as he comes out of the castle. The light work in this game and animation is something to behold. The problem is that during the game it's taken a huge amount of hit. Now it is definitely pushing a lot of effects and a lot of GPU work is being used here, but this is not the reason the frame rate is taking a tank. The game is clearly not finished. There is bugs, there is issues all throughout the game. Everyone knows that. Ubisoft know that. They've put out a forum now to basically tell everyone where they're updating the game. And they basically released it too early. There's no doubt in my mind. Another 6 months would have got this to pretty much a locked 30 frames per second on both consoles. And probably a much better performer on PC as well. But that is another story we'll go into in a moment. So overall, you cannot deny the beauty of this game. Looking up from the top of Paris, looking down on the cityscape, walking through the streets, the amount of NPCs and how they go about their business and react is absolutely stunning. No other open world game makes it feel so alive and such a vibrant city. The biggest character in this game is, by definition, Paris. It is the most beautiful city and it actually feels as if you are in Paris back in the day, with so much emotion and activity going on. As you walk down the street, people attack each other, they bicker, they argue, they move boxes and chairs. The city does feel alive and the amount of density of the population is immense. It is leaps on from any other game that is an open world. You go back to GTA 5 now and it will look like a dead, barren town. They really need to push the boat out when they release this next week on consoles, because Ubisoft certainly have raised the benchmark on that score. But it has been raised to the detriment of the performance, unfortunately. Now, you can see when you look down over the cityscape, you can see the frame rate dips quite a lot. And that's because of many things, and it's certainly to do with the CPU. They were not lying about that. There was never any lies about that. But that doesn't mean the CPUs are the only reason they're so weak. That's it, they can't do it. That's not the case at all. Yes, they're weak. Yes, a better CPU would help out. Of course it would. The problem is they haven't had time to optimize their code. This game has so much going on with it, with online connectivity, with all the physics-based work on Fabric and NPCs, the branching and AI code, the pathfinding, and obviously the epic draw calls of the amount of density of not only the city but also the population and those LOD drawings. All of this is making an effect on the consoles and of course on the PC. When they're not completely right for this either. PCs obviously have a much higher overhead with DirectX 11, and this bears out quite considerably on my PC, which is again a better machine than both of these consoles. So the Xbox One and the PS4 are not as powerful as my AMD 8350 and my Radeon 7870. On paper at least. 2 gig card mind, so the first thing that it takes a hit is obviously the texture work, but on here I'm running the textures at ultra settings, which is the same settings as what the consoles run. Yep, that's right, as Ubisoft showed with Watch Dogs, they are again following suit. There's no point in them doing all that work on texture quality and not sticking it on the biggest sales market they've got. So yes, you are running ultra textures on both consoles. As you can see here in the cutscenes, if you look at the cart that I circled there, you can see that the texture work is identical as it is on PS4 and also on PC on the highest ultra texture setting. If I set the textures to high, you can see the difference. Again, this carries over into the world, which you can see here on the wall and the ground on the PC. This is all ultra textures, and we flick back to the Xbox One and PS4, and as you can see, they're identical. Now there is some points in the game where it looks like the textures don't load fully on PC and on console, and they're kind of intermittent changing between, so it looks more to be an issue with the engine drawing the textures in, because on some points it works and some points it doesn't. So it looks more of a bug within the engine. And sure enough, this game's got enough. Consoles also run the SSAO, so that's Screen Space Ambient Occlusion, which is a given. And it's quite a good effect, it works reasonably well. On PC you obviously have the choice of HBAO+, which is Nvidia's technique. And again, you can see here it does make a difference. It's not a huge detriment and it's not a huge impact on the look and feel of the game, but it is a better technique. It works more efficiently and looks better than Screen Space Ambient Occlusion, but it's not a huge deal. You've also got the contact hardening shadows on PC if you want to run them, or as Nvidia call them, PCSS, percentage closer soft shadows. And this basically gives the effect of a shadow dispersing and blurring on the edges further away from the object and the light source that it is. So imagine the lamppost standing in the sunlight, and the further you walk away from the lamppost, you'll notice the shadow gets more blurred and less defined from the light source that it is. It's quite a heavy computational effort, and it can knock down about 4 or 5 frames per second on average if you run it on PC, and it really isn't something that you're going to notice unless you're standing staring at shadows. And in my opinion, it's not really worth the hit. I don't run them, I've never run them, and it's into that realms of diminishing returns on the amount of power it takes for what it actually looks like in difference. But that's another story that I'll go into in a minute on PC performance. So where are we sitting in terms of the world density? Well, if you look at the cart door nearest me circled, and also the boxes at the background, as we move up the range from low, you can see the door coming on medium. At the background from medium to high, you see the boxes get drawn in. And then from ultra, you see in the detail around the boxes get drawn in. High seems to be where most of the detail appears, and then from high you get ultra high, which is basically the top level, and that is pretty much, I believe, where the consoles sit, but it doesn't look an exact match. So I would say that environment quality is running between very high on the consoles and high. Ultra, I think, is just that little bit further away, but to be honest, as you can see here, you can barely notice it. And you'll see here as I'm walking back and forth with the areas that I've circled, the LOD drawing on the high setting on PC is pretty much identical to what it is on the consoles, so it doesn't really make that much of a difference anyway. What you can also see here is the PC running MSAA, which is a multi-sampled solution, but it actually looks worse than FXAA in the sense that it gives you more edge shimmer on the objects and the textures, which you can see here as I'm walking and where I've circled. FXAA does blur the image quite a lot though, and it makes the 900p image look even more blurry than it should do, but it does smooth out the image and stop that shimmery effect that you're getting on MSAA. You can also see that we're clearly running a forward render here, or a forward plus render, due to the fact the MSAA takes barely no hit at all on the frame rate, but that could be the fact that the game is so badly optimised at this point anyway that the frame rate doesn't make much difference. We run this game at 900p on the PC, and most of the shots are certainly on the text comparisons that I've shown you, running with FXAA, the very high setting on environment, the high setting on shadows, and screen space ambient occlusion, which pretty much identically matches up to what the consoles run. And as you can see from the performance in the top left, it isn't doing a great job on my machine. Now, the big problem with the PC version is performance. On my machine, it runs like a dog. It runs worse than both console versions, and in fact, it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't make any difference at all, and this sums up where the engine is at this point. You literally can drop the frame rate to 1280 by 720, which you can see here, and it makes no effect on the frame rate at all. The game is just running around 25 frames per second because that's where it's running. There's so much work going on the engine, it's tying itself in knots all the time. You can't run MSI Afterburner, or at least I've got to play around with the settings to go and try and get it to run, because what happens whenever I try and run it, it ends up crashing the game. So I can't get the two running to get an idea on the CPU and GPU usage, but I can guarantee you that when I do, I'll be looking at massive stalls on the GPU where it's running around 30-40% or even 50% and not doing anything else. The CPU is probably not even going mad either and just stalling all over the place. And this is a classic example of a game that's not optimized, and that's a word that gets overused everywhere, and I know it's something that people get confused with, but basically optimization just means, it doesn't mean sprinkle magical powder over things and make it all better. It means just spend time on your code and your techniques to make sure you're doing the right thing at the right time. And if you've got huge amounts of code that's iterating through different variations of what things can and can't do based on hardware, settings, basically working out an if statement, that's how these things work. If your code is branchy and all over the place and very, very heavy, then your CPU is just running along this, trying to work out what to do before it decides to do anything at all. And that weighs out into real lag in the game, and that's what you're seeing on the frame rate. There's points in the game where you can stand still, and I'm losing 6 frames per second. I'm not doing anything, I'm just standing still. A game shouldn't have that kind of variation when you're not moving or having an input on the game, and that's the game's main issue. They've finished it. It was definitely finished, but this is basically a beta or even an alpha. But they needed another 6 months to get it, and Ubisoft unfortunately did not give the team that time to do it, and they should have done. The other example of why this is a beta and it's so early, and also why the PS4 version was lacking, is this version I'm playing here on the PS4 is identical to the Xbox One version in many ways. The settings are the same, all the features are the same as I've just showed you before. One thing's different though, and that's the PS4 version runs an unlocked frame rate. and it does hit 60 frames per second at points, but again, like you can get on a PC, you have to be climbing a tower, looking up, just like you would on any other game, and here you can clearly see the frame rate is shooting up to 60 frames per second. If you run the patch and update this, it locks it to 30. It also adds in and fixes some of the glitches, but it doesn't make much of an improvement. I've actually gone back and uninstalled it and reinstalled it again to leave it on this version for now, and I'm not going to update it because I prefer to play the game in this method. Now, don't get me wrong, the game barely hits anything above 30 frames per second. You literally have to be climbing up, looking up in the sky, or running across rooftops. But it is smoother. If you have the retail version of this, then if you get chance, uninstall it, remove all the patches, and then reinstall the game again without running the update patch. Unplug your network cable, give it a go. Jump into Paris, climb up in the air, just where you see me now, and have a look around. And I'll give you an example here. This is the Xbox One of me climbing that same tower. This is locked at 30 frames per second, and this particular scene here is running at 30 frames per second. Here's the PS4 version on the same part. This is a 60 FPS encoded video, so you can clearly see the frame rate difference there, and that's because it runs an unlocked frame rate. Here's the PC version, nearly getting up to 60 frames per second, and bearing in mind this is an 8-core CPU, way more powerful than what's inside the PS4 and Xbox One, and also my GPU is more powerful. So the difference here is quite large, and it certainly shows where this game is in its state of flux. And maybe with another 6 months or a year they would have got to an unlocked 60 frame rate, but certainly 30 locked would have been easily doable. And this is something that I think would have been a nice touch to have. But that said, open world games running on 30 frames per second, a locked 30, is the most important thing over a frame rate that's dipping up and down all over the place. And let's be honest, you need a frigging good rig to run this game anywhere near 60. Now, this is literally a superb looking game. If you turn on all the settings and turn it up to 4K, if you've got the power, it will look stunning. But it actually looks stunning running at 900p. Whether you buy this on PS4 or Xbox One, you're not going to care if it's running at 900. It looks absolutely stunning. The FXAA anti-aliasing solution in the game is very good, and it's certainly been tweaked from standard. They've done such a good job to stop all of the edgy in anti-aliasing work around edges of people's faces, people's hair, and also inside of textures. It is very neat and very tidy. You don't get lots of sub-pixel crawl anywhere. If you look in the distance on very thin objects, you can still see it, and it is still there. But it is a superb implementation of anti-aliasing, and this game running at 900p should put nobody off. But you can't get away from the performance issues in the game, and it actually feels worse when you're coming from the PS4 version because of the fact that when you go up in the air it raises above 30 frames per second. That smoothness does start to kick in, but the jarring drop to like 25, 22-ish kind of frames per second when you're in the middle of a crowd is a bit of a digger, and it's something that I hope they can work on. But like I said before in my last video, they've only got a couple of weeks until that could be done. If they keep waiting around and waiting around, there's going to be no sales left on this game, and they've got a big problem now anyway, because I don't think the sales on this are going to be very high. I think a lot of people are waiting. Now, this is the technical analysis. The review is coming later, but obviously what I do want to say is, even though the performance issues are not great and they're not recommended, even though the performance issues are not welcome, and I don't stress in any way, shape or form to ignore them, it shouldn't ruin you from playing this game. It's actually perfectly playable. There's a lot of hyperbole on the internet, surprise surprise, on it's running this and it's crap and it's better on a PC and all this kind of stuff. I can tell you now it's not. I have heard and have seen that it runs better on NVIDIA cards, and that's simply because they've got a much lighter overhead on CPU drivers for their graphics cards, and it's something that I will be testing out on my next video to give you an idea of it, because I have gone out and purchased a 970. I can't wait anymore, and I think it's fair to you guys to get a proper analysis of what it runs like on an AMD card and an NVIDIA card. The Advanced Warfare is a classic example of another game that runs much better on NVIDIA GPUs than it runs on AMD GPUs, and it's about the driver work on CPU, and that's a big thing this generation. And this game is massively CPU bound, but it also has issues in its code base. It's never been optimized and cleaned up. It never got to that stage. That said, It is a beautiful, stunning game. From the superb lighting engine in the game, which uses light probes to calculate the light sources in objects, people and areas, to the absolutely stunning hair, which is actually improved further on both consoles than it is on PC. But I expect this to be patched out at some point, and I'm running the latest patch version here, which was released yesterday on the PC, or today. And this literally, as you can see here, you can see the hair of Elise has less detail and less volume to it than it does on the consoles, both Xbox One and PS4. That aside though, as it stands at the moment, unless you've got a really, really good rig, you are not going to run this game better than what you can run it on consoles. My advice, if you've got an Nvidia card, then literally look at what your CPU is. If it's something like an i5 or an i7, then you should probably be okay. AMD users literally need to be top end, or just wait and see if AMD release a driver specific for this game, which I'm sure they will, and Ubisoft release some more patches. That aside, like I say, it's still a fun, enjoyable game. You just have to look past the performance issues. If you've got the PS4 version, then do what I've done, leave it offline, don't update it. It's actually a much better and much smoother experience. Who'd have thought it, eh? There's no conspiracy here though. I think it's just a case of they're working through solutions and updates, and that makes it worse. That said, the Xbox One, as you can see here, you've got parts where you can drop the frame rate down to, well, basically from frames per second to how many seconds you can get per frame. It really is bonkers mad. But it is a very enjoyable game with superb music playing throughout and a great orchestral score, great voice acting. If you like Assassin's Creed, this game is going to deliver. That is pretty much all I can say. I will get the review up when I've finished the game, when I've given it enough time to give you a thorough review, but as it stands at the moment, I'm enjoying it. The performance isn't that bad, and that's across all three platforms. But unfortunately, at the moment, as you can see, the PC version is by far the least preferable. It just doesn't perform anywhere near like it should. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you did, or any of my other content, then please hit that sub button. It really helps me immensely, and I really, really appreciate it. Leave your thoughts and feedback below. What did you think of this game? Have you bought it? Did you enjoy it? Is it fun? Who knows? Give me your feedback. I always like to hear what you guys and girls have to say. As always, you take care. Now I'm off to explore this beautiful city of Paris, and I'll see you on the next one.
Comment je vais faire sur votre aide?